My ex showed up tonight with his perfect upgrade. He told me I was too dramatic for high society. He smiled like he owned the room. His upgrade clung to his arm like the prize. For 7 years, they told me to shrink, be quieter, softer, more appropriate. Tonight, I curated an exhibit the entire city came to see. And right when they thought they'd won, but then Damien Cross, the billionaire whose signature can change skylines, walked straight through the crowd. He passed every politician, every donor, every flashing grin, and stopped in front of me.
Welcome to Stagecraft Entertainment, where stories don't just unfold, they command attention. Each audio story is crafted like cinema for the mind, rich with tension, emotion, and truth, celebrating love, identity, and humanity without limits. Lean in and let Stagecraft Entertainment take you inside the story.
The air in the grand ballroom of the Lumina Institute is thick with the scent of expensive orchids and the desperate hum of Los Angeles social climbing. Becca Walsh stands before a floor-to-ceiling mirror in the curator's suite, her reflection a study in defiance. She is a vision in her evening gown. The silk of her teal-colored dress clings to her curves, a silhouette that demands space rather than apologizing for it. Her long, wavy brown hair, woven with honey blonde highlights, cascades over her shoulders in a deliberate, elegant mess. She adjusts the strap of her dress, her honey-colored eyes sharp and clear, though her pulse thrums a frantic rhythm against her ribs. "He's here," Callie says, leaning against the doorframe with a glass of Pinot Noir. "With the little influencer. She looks like a generic preset in a video game, Becca. You look like a masterpiece." Becca takes a breath, centering herself. This isn't about Councilman Ian Walsh. It isn't about the 7 years she spent polishing his image while he tarnished hers. It is about the art on the walls, her vision, her triumph. Becca pushes open the heavy oak doors, the swell of a string quartet greeting her like a wave. The ballroom is a cathedral of glass and steel, perched high enough above downtown LA that the grid of traffic lights below looks like a spilled jewelry box. She moves through the crowd, her heels clicking against the polished marble with a steady, metronomic confidence. Internally, she feels the old ghosts tugging at her hem, not just the specter of her failed marriage, but the weight of every room in this city that expected her to be smaller, quieter, or more manageable. She remembers Ian's mother at their first high society Christmas, her eyes skimming Becca's curvaceous frame and natural hair with a clinical coldness before suggesting a good stylist who could make her look more Palos Verdes appropriate. She remembers Ian's own voice, hushed and urgent before a campaign dinner. "Becca, honey, maybe tone down the jewelry? We need to appeal to the Valley voters, and you can be a bit urban for their tastes." To them, her biracial heritage was a political box to be checked when convenient and a liability to be suppressed when the cameras were off. They wanted her honey-colored eyes and sun-kissed skin for the brochures, but they wanted her soul to remain in the background. She recalls the voice of Ian's mother, Miriam, a woman who treated Becca's biracial heritage like a stain that could be bleached out with enough refinement. Becca remembers the suffocating silence of Thanksgiving dinners where Eleanor would openly mourn Ian's college sweetheart, a blue-blooded debutante, before turning to Becca to ask if she'd ever considered thinning out her hair to look more professional. To the Walsh family, Becca was a diversity win for Ian's progressive platform, but a private embarrassment for their country club lineage. She remembers the countless times Ian sat in silence as his father made disparaging remarks about those neighborhoods in the Crenshaw district where Becca's father grew up. Ian hadn't defended her. He had simply reached under the table and squeezed her hand, a silent command for her to swallow her pride for the sake of his polling numbers. But as she passes the first installation, raw, jagged, abstract sculptures she fought the museum board to include, the ghosts vanish. She is no longer the woman who waits in the wings, adjusting her hemline to appease a woman who hated the very skin she lived in. Then, she sees them. Ian stands near the bar, looking every bit the great white hope of the city council. Beside him stands Lydia. The girl is a living, breathing embodiment of Miriam Walsh's Christmas list, blonde, rail-thin, and possessing the kind of effortless, inherited appropriateness that requires no explanation. Lydia is the upgrade the Walsh family had prayed for, a woman who fits the portrait over their fireplace without needing a single edit. On sight, Becca knows Lydia received the stamp of approval that Becca had bled 7 years trying to earn. A sharp, cold clarity washes over Becca. She isn't just a curator tonight. She is a reclamation. She catches her reflection in a glass partition, the golden highlights in her wavy hair shimmering like armor, her curves held high in a dress that mocks the modesty Ian's family once demanded. Lydia might be the woman they wanted, but Becca is the woman they couldn't handle. Now, seeing the city's elite forced to stand in the shadow of that bronze and iron, Becca feels the shift in her own spine. She has spent years as the plus one, the beautiful accessory to a man who was terrified of her depth. Tonight, she is the curator. She is the gatekeeper. Her long, wavy hair, with its golden highlights catching the light of the chandeliers, isn't something to be tamed. It's her crown. She moves past a group of donors who look at her with a mix of surprise and grudging respect. They aren't used to seeing a woman who looks like her holding the keys to the kingdom. Becca doesn't just walk. She occupies the space. Every curve, every shade of her brown skin, every ounce of her brilliance is on full display. She is no longer the woman who waits in the wings, curating someone else's life. She is the architect of the evening, and for the first time in 30-some years, she doesn't feel the need to ask for permission to exist. In the center of the room, beneath a chandelier that drips with enough crystal to blind a lesser woman, stands Councilman Ian Walsh. He is the image of manufactured California perfection, teeth too white, tan too even. Beside him, Lydia clings to his arm. She is wearing a simple, understated navy shift dress that screams old money, her blonde hair pulled back into a tight, frictionless bun. She is the quiet, pale moon to Becca's sun, and the way Ian looks at her is with the smug relief of a man who finally has a partner who won't cause a scene. When Ian spots Becca, his smile doesn't reach his eyes. It is the same look he used to give her right before a donor gala, the look that said, "Please don't embarrass me." "Becca," he says, stepping forward to intercept her. He doesn't look at her face. His eyes skim her body, lingering on the gold silk of her dress with a flick of distaste. "I see you've gone for high drama tonight. A bit much for a charity event, don't you think? It screams, 'Look at me,' which we both know was always your struggle." "It's an art gala, Ian," Becca replies, her voice like velvet-wrapped steel. "The entire point is to look, though I suppose you're more used to people looking away when you speak." Ian's jaw tightens, his politician's mask slipping for a fraction of a second. Lydia pipes up, her voice a practiced, breathy lilt. "Oh, Becca, the gallery is so colorful. It's so brave of you to try and make it on your own. Ian's mother was just saying how much more peaceful things are now that the household isn't so turbulent." The word turbulent hangs in the air, a thinly veiled code for Becca's passion, her culture, and the very life force she refused to dim. Lydia looks at Becca with a pitying smile, the look of a woman who knows she was invited to the family brunch while Becca was relegated to the history books. "Miriam always did prefer the silence of an empty room," Becca retorts, meeting Lydia's gaze. "I'm sure you fit right in." The air in the room suddenly chills, then heightens. A silence ripples from the entrance, a physical weight that makes even the most self-important donors turn their heads. Damian Cross enters. He is a monolith in a tailored black suit, his muscular frame moving with the prowling grace of a predator who knows he owns the jungle. In a city of performers, Damian is the real thing. He ignores the outstretched hands of city officials and the fluttering lashes of starlets, his focus laser-locked on the woman in the teal dress. He stops inches from Becca, his presence effectively erasing Ian from the conversation. He is tall, enough that Becca has to tilt her head back to meet eyes that are dark, intelligent, and currently burning with an intensity that makes her breath hitch. "Miss Walsh," Damien rumbles, his voice a low frequency that seems to vibrate through the very floorboards. "I was told the curator of this collection was a woman of exceptional vision. They failed to mention that the art on the walls is merely a pale imitation of the woman who chose it." Ian attempts to regain his footing, stepping into Damien's periphery, desperate to be seen by the billionaire. "Mr. Cross, I'm Councilman Walsh. This is my partner Lydia. We've spoken via email about the downtown zoning." Damien doesn't turn his head. He doesn't even blink. He keeps his eyes on Becca, his gaze lingering on the golden highlights of her hair and the defiant set of her shoulders. "I don't discuss business with men who interrupt my conversations with brilliant women, Councilman," Damien says, his voice cold enough to frost the champagne glasses. "And I certainly don't discuss zoning with men who lack the vision to see the treasure they held in their own hands." Ian opens his mouth to stage a recovery, his face flushing a mottled purple that clashes spectacularly with his silk tie. "Cross, listen, Becca is prone to flights of fancy. She's likely told you some version of our history that—" "Our history?" Becca interrupts, her voice steady. "Ian, you became history the moment you traded a partner for a prop." Damien doesn't give Ian the satisfaction of a rebuttal. He moves with a quiet, practiced authority, stepping into the narrow gap between Becca and her past. He places a hand on the small of her back, not a restrictive hold but a grounding, warm presence that feels like a shield. "I believe we've exhausted the utility of this conversation," Damien says, his voice cutting through Ian's stammering like a diamond through glass. He looks down at Becca, his expression softening into something devastatingly private. "Miss Walsh, I didn't fight through the 405 traffic tonight to discuss city zoning or listen to the insecurities of a man who clearly lacks a sense of value. I came here for you." He glances over his shoulder at the councilman and the silent, wide-eyed Lydia. "If you'll excuse us, I've been promised an expert's perspective on the collection, and frankly, your presence is cluttering the view." With a subtle, commanding pressure, Damien steers Becca away. He navigates the crowded ballroom with the grace of a man used to parting seas, guiding her toward the glass-walled staircase that leads to the quieter, more intimate upper mezzanine. Behind them, Ian is left standing in the wake of a billionaire's dismissal, his mouth working silently as the surrounding donors begin to whisper. As they reach the upper gallery, the roar of the gala fades into a sophisticated hum. The air up here is cooler, smelling of floor wax and expensive perfume. The lighting is dimmed to protect the more delicate sketches, creating pockets of amber warmth. Damien finally lets his hand drop from her back, though he remains close enough that Becca can feel the heat radiating from his frame. "I apologize for the bluntness downstairs," he says, his eyes searching hers. "I've never had much patience for men who treat brilliance like a burden." Becca exhales a breath she feels like she's been holding for 7 years. "You didn't have to do that, but I'm glad you did." "I did it for selfish reasons," Damien admits, walking slowly toward a large, textured oil painting. He clasps his hands behind his back, studying the work with a genuine, unhurried appreciation. "I've been an admirer of your work for a long time, Becca. Not just the pieces you sign, but the way you curate. You have a way of finding the hidden pulse in a room. I've sat in my office in Century City looking at the pieces I've purchased through your gallery, wondering when the woman behind the vision would finally step into the light." Becca's heart skips. "You've bought more than just emerging?" 4 pieces in the last 2 years, he reveals, turning to look at her. "All under different holding companies. I didn't want the curators, or your then-husband, knowing I was tracking your eye for talent. I wanted to see if you'd stay true to your aesthetic even when the world was telling you to be more Palos Verdes appropriate, as I believe his mother puts it." He gestures toward the long corridor of the upper gallery, where the moonlight from the floor-to-ceiling windows spills across the floor. "The gala can survive 10 minutes without its architect," Damien murmurs, a small, challenging smile playing on his lips. "Give me the tour I've been waiting for. Show me what you see when you look at these walls. I want to know the mind that curated my favorite world. Becca looks at him, really looks at him, and realizes he isn't just a donor or a billionaire. He is the first person in a decade to ask her to lead. She squares her shoulders, the teal silk of her dress shimmering, and gestures toward the first canvas. Then let's start here, she says, her voice full of a new reclaimed power. Because this piece isn't about what it shows, it's about what it hides. As they move deeper into the upper mezzanine, the shadows of the gallery stretch long and elegant across the hardwood floors. Becca stops before a large, visceral canvas, a storm of deep indigos and sharp electric golds. It is a piece that Ian had once called messy and unrefined. Most people see chaos here, Becca says, her voice steady and resonant in the quiet space. She points to a subtle, fractured line of white light cutting through the center of the darkness. But the artist painted this during a period of total upheaval. That line isn't an accident. It's the moment of clarity that comes only after everything you thought you knew has been burned away. It's the beauty of the aftermath. Damien steps closer, his shoulder nearly brushing hers. He doesn't look at the painting. He looks at her. The aftermath, he repeats, his voice a low vibration. It takes a certain kind of courage to find beauty in the wreckage. Most people just try to sweep the debris under the rug and pretend the fire never happened. I spent 7 years sweeping debris, Becca admits, her eyes fixed on the canvas. Trying to make sure the rug stayed straight for the Walsh family photos. I forgot that the fire is where the transformation happens. Damien turns fully toward her, his muscular frame silhouetted against the moonlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows. You didn't forget, Becca. You just waited for the right light to see yourself by. I've seen your work, but hearing you speak. It's like hearing a symphony after years of listening to static. The intellectual chemistry is a palpable thing, a bridge of shared understanding that feels sturdier than any foundation she'd built with Ian. Damien isn't just looking at her beauty, he is listening to her soul. He asks her about the tension between form and void, about the politics of the LA art scene, and about her own hidden paintings. For every thought she offers, he meets her with an insight that challenges and affirms her. They reach the end of the gallery, a secluded alcove overlooking the twinkling lights of the Hollywood Hills. The air is thick with a different kind of tension now, one that has nothing to do with art and everything to do with the man standing inches away. I didn't just come for a tour, Becca, Damien whispers, his hand rising to graze the golden highlights of her hair. His touch is light, almost reverent, but it sends a jolt of electricity straight to her core. I came because I wanted to see if the woman I've been admiring from a distance was as brave as her choices. And you are. You're more. Becca looks up into his dark, searching eyes. For the first time, she doesn't feel the need to justify her presence or apologize for her curves. She feels seen. Damien, I've spent my life building things, he murmurs, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. But I think I've been waiting for someone who knows how to create something real. His eyes focus on her mouth and darken in a way that makes heat pool low in her belly. Then his thumb traces her bottom lip. May I? The request is a whisper, a stark contrast to the way Ian used to demand her attention. Becca nods, her fingers curling into the fine wool of his blazer. Damien leans in, his movements slow and deliberate, giving her every second to retreat. But she doesn't. When his lips finally meet hers, the world below, the gala, the donors, the Walsh family legacy, simply ceases to exist. When his lips finally find hers, it isn't the tentative, apologetic kiss she had grown used to over a decade of marriage. This is a tectonic shift. It is firm, possessive, and tastes of expensive bourbon and an even more expensive ambition. Damien's hand, which had been resting lightly on her waist, splayed across the small of her back, pulling her flush against the hard, tailored lines of his chest. Through the thin teal silk of her gown, she can feel the solid wall of his muscles, a stark contrast to the softness of her own curves. His other hand migrates from her jawline to the nape of her neck. his fingers tangling in the long, wavy brown hair she had spent hours perfecting. The blonde highlights seem to shimmer as he tilts her head back, deepening the kiss with a hungry, desperate intent that leaves her breathless. For Becca, the world narrows to the scent of his woodsy cologne and the intoxicating pressure of his mouth against hers. It is a sensory reclamation. Every microaggression from the Walsh family, every cold look from Miriam, and every dismissive comment from Ian is burned away in the friction of their contact. Damien doesn't kiss her like she's a fragile porcelain doll or a political asset. He kisses her like she is the prize at the end of a long, wearying war. His tongue sweeps against hers, a silent, bold inquiry that she answers with a soft moan against his lips. Her fingers, buried in the lapels of his blazer, tighten, pulling him closer as if she could draw his strength into her own marrow. In this alcove, hidden from the prying eyes of the Los Angeles elite, Becca feels the heavy armor of curator and ex-wife fall away. She is simply a woman being seen, truly, deeply seen, by a man who isn't afraid of the fire she carries. When they finally break apart, the silence of the gallery is punctuated only by their ragged breathing. Damien's forehead rests against hers, his eyes dark with a fierce, protective heat. He looks at her swollen lips and the dazed, honey glow of her eyes, and for the first time in years, Becca doesn't feel the need to check the mirror to see if she's enough.
Are you serious right now, Becca? The voice cuts through the silence like a rusted blade. They break apart slowly, Damien's arm remaining firmly around Becca's waist as they turn. Ian stands at the entrance of the alcove, his face a distorted mask of rage and humiliation. Lydia is a few steps behind him, looking pale and deeply uncomfortable, her hands twisted in the fabric of her navy dress. "You're making a fool of yourself," Ian spits, his voice trembling with a toxic mix of jealousy and wounded pride. "Throwing yourself at a billionaire in the middle of a professional event? My mother was right about you. You have no class, no sense of propriety. You're desperate." Becca feels Damien's frame go rigid beside her, his hand tightening protectively on her hip, but she steps forward before he can speak. She doesn't need a shield. She is the sword. "Ian," she says, her voice remarkably calm, "the only thing desperate in this room is a man who followed his ex-wife upstairs because he can't stand the fact that he's no longer the most interesting thing in her life." She takes a step toward him, the teal silk of her dress shimmering in the moonlight. "You talk about class? Class is knowing when a chapter is over. Class is not gaslighting the woman who built your career. And proprietary? If I wanted a lesson in propriety, I'd ask someone who didn't spend our final year of marriage texting friends in the hospital parking lot." Ian's face goes from red to a sickly white. Lydia's eyes go wide, her gaze darting to Ian with a sudden, sharp suspicion. "You're finished, Ian," Becca continues, her voice dropping to a deadly quiet hiss. "Go back downstairs, take your stamp of approval and go home, because from this moment on you don't even exist in my peripheral vision." Damien steps up beside her, his height and muscled presence making Ian look small, almost fragile. "I believe the lady gave you an exit cue, Councilman. I'd suggest you take it before I decide to make your turbulent personal life the lead story on the morning news." Ian looks at Damien, then at the fire in Becca's eyes, and finally realizes he has no cards left to play. He turns on his heel, marching away with a frantic, hollow dignity. Lydia hesitates for a second, looking at Becca with a flicker of something that might be regret, before scurrying after him. Becca exhales, a small, triumphant laugh escaping her lips. She turns back to Damien, who is watching her with an expression of pure, unadulterated pride. "Now," Damien says, offering his arm, "about that dinner?"